Yeah, thank you very much, Baso, for inviting me. Thank you for your interest coming. I could start with a happy birthday, because 15 years, if you were not an organization or EuroPsy, not an institution, we could say when you're 15 years old, it's an interesting age, at least when you're a man. So, kind of a rough age, perhaps. Yeah. Thank you, Thalis, for your explanation of the history of EuroPsy and the developments within EFPA. I think you saved me many slides, so I can move on quite quickly. As you gave a perfect description of the development of the history, I could perhaps use my slides a little bit more to focus on the learning process, which is also associated with EuroPsy, because I think already listening to you, thanks to Babi's translation, you nicely described that there was quite a long development of EuroPsy, but it's not at the end. We're still moving on. And well, so thanks again for inviting me. And actually, I came to EuroPsy because I was the chair of a working group who had the task to introduce new aspects to EuroPsy, given the International Declaration of Core Competencies of Psychology, and to reflect on developments during the last 15 years, so to say, where we have to innovate a little bit or modernize EuroPsy. And after we did this work in a working group, they thought it was not so bad, and they asked me to chair the EuroPsy committee 2 years ago, and now we are in this new process. So there's already said a lot about EFPA. I will be very quick about that, and then talk just a little bit about the current training framework, about the specialist aspects, and the EuroPsy competence model. That's where we focused on with this working group. And supervised practice, that's, I think, an important issue you mentioned also right now, and continuous professional development, quite briefly. As already has been said, I think EFPA is a really great movement. We have not only all members of the European Union, but many other European countries, and there are more than 400,000 psychologists represented via these national associations. And I think it's important to have this learning platform, I would say, and this representation platform for the further development of the profession of psychology. And for EuroPsy, I think it's important to say not only it's something important for psychologists, but I would rather start with the consumers, with the people who want to consult a psychologist. I think it's very important to protect the consumers, that they get a good standard of quality, either when they are consulted or when they are treated as a patient. And EuroPsy, I don't want to go all through all points. EuroPsy is both a standard, so it's a standard for doing good education, and I'd say also by doing that good work as a psychologist, but then also a certificate to certify for those who have this, meet this standard, that they are either a EuroPsy psychologist or a specialist in fulfilling these standards. EuroPsy, of course, respects national standards, so we don't override them, but it's also kind of perhaps a comparison for national governments to assess whether they could improve perhaps national standards. You see, there are lots of countries participating in EuroPsy, 27 actually, and there are more and more getting on the way. And I think when you look back in the history, EuroPsy had a big influence in legislation processes, and like it's just a couple of countries mentioned here, like Spain, Portugal, and Croatia, who really developed their law within those countries according to the standards of EuroPsy. So that's a good success. And I think that's also good for the consumers in those countries because people fulfill these criteria. EuroPsy, of course, has a governance structure or a regulation process behind it. EuroPsy is part of EFPA, our committees. So EFPA, the General Assembly or the Board of Directors, are those representing and having the final say, so to say. And within EuroPsy, we have the European EuroPsy Committee. Till the beginning of this year, it was kind of an awarding committee. Now the name's changed, both on the European level and on the national level. We call it not longer like a European or a national awarding committee. We call it a EuroPsy committee because we want to strengthen that it's a standard, yeah. And the standard is the first thing to come, and the second thing then might be the certificate. But even if you don't have the certificate, the standard is important. So, and what we also did, and I would like to mention that perhaps not everybody is within the NEC, but within the with your Greek association, we thought the National EuroPsy Committee as a new task we introduced with the General Assembly now in Paphos in Cyprus is important task is really to consult the full member in terms of the standards we have in Europe and to reflect and develop, help the full member association develop the national standards. I think that's an important aspect. And just to give you an example, we have in several countries in Europe ongoing legislation processes. For full members, it's important to know what's happening in other countries. By having national EuroPsy committees report to us as a European member and to discuss with their colleagues in the annual meeting, we inform ourselves about the national legislation standards in each country. And that's important when you talk with your own politics. And so to achieve this, it's really important to have a close cooperation, I think, which you have here in Greece, between the National EuroPsy Committee and the full member association. Yeah, that's just, again, the picture of the new governance structure where you have one committee on the European level and one committee on each full member country level. And that's a difference to the older system because in some countries we had specialist certificates and you had specialist committees, and we wanted to integrate it to have a more a closer cooperation and closer discussion between within the committee, so to say, regarding the general EuroPsy standard and the specialist standards. I think Talis already said something about the requirements for EuroPsy. So we have on the one hand the EuroPsy training education framework, which is for EuroPsy more or less a 6-year program, a 5-year academic program plus supervised practice. And people who want to get a EuroPsy certificate, they have to meet those 3 + 2 + 1 year phase, so to say, to develop academic as well as professional competences. And they also have to adhere to the professional code of ethics. I think that's also very important. And also endorse for lifelong learning commitment. What you have learned 20 years ago is no longer valid, perhaps. So you have to continue your education and training over your whole career. I think that's important. So I don't go into details here. I just want to say on the left side, EuroPsy is a moving development. As you see, we have right now 5 fields of practice since July this year: community, and social intervention is a new field of practice. So we are expanding a little bit in the different fields. And we also expanding, as you now see, within the specializations. We just have clinical neuropsychology as a specialist standard and certificate. And we're right now, I was just approached, I think in the next 2 years we'll have the development of educational psychology also as a specialist standards, and probably the next General Assembly 2027 will pass that. So that will be the next step we will work on in the next 2 years. What I now come to is the EuroPsy specialization requirements. I think that's an important issue where we had worked on in the last year, because we had some inconsistencies between the different specialisms, and we tried also to define on the first level, as I said 2 years ago, generic requirements regarding the EuroPsy. Already have described them and the major requirements, so I just can get on and talk to the EuroPsy competence model. We tried to integrate what the international discussion, so to say, on competences, and especially psychological competences, and we adopted an American framework from the APA, more or less, where we differentiate between two types of competences. One, more the foundational competences, that means how psychologists work, and functional competences in terms of what they do, and different stages of professional development. And what does this mean? In terms of the functional competences, we have the process of getting the work done. When a client comes to you, you first do some kind of need identification, what kind of problem somebody has or what kind of task he wants to have solved, and get a contract, and then get into planning, and then implementing, and then check whether it works. And then on the how psychologists work, you see, I don't go into the details, certain aspects like ethical questions, like how to deal with diversities, that's common through all these phases. And you see on the right side the stages of professional development, which means that after the academic training, you're ready for supervised practice to get, so to say, the professional experience. And then when you pass the professional, the evaluation by your supervisor, you're ready for independent practice. And then you might even go on further in a type of specialization like psychotherapy or clinical neuropsychology, or in my field, into work and organizational psychology as a further step of qualification. And I think where still is work to be done is on the European level. Like when you do a university curricula, so you usually do that as well. You actually define learning outcomes, yeah, when you do your academic training, but also when you go into your supervised practice, you define learning outcomes, and you break down the more generic competences in specific psychological knowledge, skills, and attitudes which have to be reached or met. And these we try to define. I don't go into details, just an example. When you talk with your client about his client's needs, you define as a learning outcome what somebody has to fulfill, so to say, when he wants to meet that. And we can go through all the different aspects of functional competences and define learning outcomes. And you can also do that with foundational ones. You see here in terms of ethical aspects. I don't go into detail. And then you go down knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Just see here a skill that you have to be able to establish a good contact with the client, and are able to do interviewing and listening, etc. That's the competence model which we have for both the EuroPsy and which we also developed for the different specialisms where we have specific competences. And after that, to check that, we do that when you go for independent practice. And where we do that is during supervised practice, that you have a qualified supervisor. And so he's on-the-job learning, if you like. And then on-the-job learning, he has to assess whether his trainee, so to say, the psychologist in the training, is actually yet competent for the various aspects. And then the supervisor suggests to the National EuroPsy Committee that somebody can get the certificate as he meets the standard. And last but not least, the continuing professional development. Just see, we refer that people have to work in a field to keep up their competences and do additional personal and professional development activities. They have to do this in a certain amount. They have to document it. They have to reflect whether they're taking part in a workshop, what kind of competences is developed by taking part in this workshop or in a training, and show this record to the National EuroPsy Committee, and then after the revalidation period, this certificate, so to say, can be rewarded again. And let me end with this, because this very idea I think is important. I'm not a practitioner, I'm a practitioner researcher, if you like, and for researchers, continuous learning is essential, because what you have discovered yesterday might be wrong tomorrow. We try to develop. And I think that's a crucial idea, not only of psychology, but also, of course, also of psychology. And if you want to give good service to society and to your customers, you have to have a continuous learning process. And we do try to do this as well within EFPA and with you as members of national EuroPsy committees in our annual meeting, reflecting about what is working and how to get better. Thank you very much.